There is a group of people in Southeast Asia who spend more of their waking lives underwater than on land. They do not use oxygen tanks. They do not use wetsuits. They dive to 40 meters on a single breath with a wooden mask and a spear, and they have been doing it every working day for over 1,000 years. Children in these communities learn to move through water before they are fully comfortable on solid ground. Some of their elders deliberately punctured their own eardrums as children. Permanent hearing loss, accepted without hesitation, because the pressure pain during deep dives was slowing them down. They are the Bajau, and they are not simply very good at diving. Their bodies are different from yours. In 2018, a geneticist named Melissa Ilardo published a paper in the journal Cell comparing the Bajau to a neighbouring inland farming group called the Saluan. Same region, same diet in many respects. Two completely different relationships with the ocean. She ran ultrasound scans on both groups and found that the Bajau had spleens 50% larger than the Saluan. Not from training, not from disease, but baked into their DNA. A gene linked to spleen size appeared at significantly higher frequency in the Bajau. Even Bajau who did not dive had larger spleens than the Saluan average. 1,000 years of diving had changed the organ itself. This is not a story about technique. It is a story about what happens when an entire people's survival depends on going underwater, and the ocean starts writing itself into their biology. The Bajau, sometimes called the sea nomads, are a maritime people distributed across the southern Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia, concentrated particularly around the Coral Triangle, one of the most biodiverse marine environments on Earth. Their relationship with the sea is not recreational. For most of their history, the Bajau lived on houseboats or in stilt houses built directly over the water. They fished, harvested sea cucumbers, caught octopus, and collected shellfish, not as a supplement to a land-based economy, but as the economy itself. Some communities spent so little time on land that children learned to walk on boats before they learned to walk on solid ground, and some older Bajau deliberately perforated their eardrums as children to reduce pain during deep dives, accepting permanent hearing loss as an acceptable trade for better performance underwater. The diving itself is done on a single breath with a wooden mask, weighted with a rock or a belt, using a wooden or metal spear for fishing. No oxygen tank. No wetsuit in most traditional contexts. Dives routinely reach 20 to 40 meters. Some experienced divers go deeper. Dive times of 5 minutes are common. In documented cases, experienced Bajau divers have stayed under for 13 minutes. To understand why that number is extraordinary, you need to understand what happens to the human body when it dives. When a human being submerges in cold water, the body triggers a set of automatic physiological responses, called the mammalian dive response. It happens whether you choose it or not. The heart rate drops, sometimes dramatically. In trained divers, heart rates below 20 beats per minute have been recorded during deep dives. The blood vessels in the limbs and extremities constrict, redirecting blood toward the brain, heart, and lungs. Metabolism slows. The body becomes more conservative with oxygen, buying time. At depth, the lungs compress. At 10 meters, lung volume is halved by water pressure. At 30 meters, it is a quarter of its surface volume. The rib cage must be flexible enough to accommodate this without injury, and experienced deep divers develop rib cages that are more compliant than average, adapting over years of repeated compression. But the most important single factor in breath hold duration is not lung volume or heart rate. It is the spleen. The spleen stores red blood cells. When the dive response triggers, the spleen contracts, squeezing its reservoir of oxygen-carrying blood cells into the circulation. This is called splenic contraction, and it can increase the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood by 9% or more in a single contraction. In marine mammals, seals, dolphins, diving whales, the spleen is proportionately enormous, and splenic contraction is a major part of how they achieve their extraordinary dive times. Ilardo's discovery was that the Bajau had taken a step in that direction. Their spleens were larger than their non-diving neighbours, which meant more stored red blood cells, which meant more oxygen available on contraction, which meant longer dives. Ilardo's 2018 paper identified several genetic variants present at higher frequency in the Bajau than in the Saluan. PDE10A is the most discussed. Its role in thyroid hormone regulation connects to the control of spleen size, and its elevated frequency in the Bajau suggests it has been under positive selection. People with the variant, who had larger spleens, dived longer, caught more food, survived better, had more children. Over enough generations, the variant became more common. This is textbook natural selection. What makes it remarkable is the speed. 1,000 years is not long in evolutionary time. The Bajau have been a maritime people for roughly that period, based on linguistic and historical evidence. Possibly longer. The selection pressure was strong enough and consistent enough that measurable physical change occurred within that window. The paper also identified variants in genes associated with other diving-relevant traits, including carbon dioxide tolerance. One of the limiting factors in breath-hold diving is not actually running out of oxygen. It is the rising level of carbon dioxide in the blood, triggering the urge to breathe. Divers who can tolerate higher CO2 levels before the urge becomes overwhelming can stay under longer. Variants that blunt that response would be strongly selected for in a population that depends on diving. Ilardo's team was careful about their claims. The genetics are associated, not definitively causal. Larger studies are needed to establish mechanism. But the spleen size difference was directly measured by ultrasound, and it was not explained by diving training alone. Even Bajau, who did not dive, had larger spleens than the Saluan average. The genetics are the scientific layer of a story that the Bajau have been living practically for a very long time. Bajau diving knowledge is transmitted from childhood. Children begin entering the water as infants, held by parents. By the time they are old enough to dive independently, the water is not an alien environment. It is the one they know best. The acclimatization begins before the lungs have finished developing. Experienced Bajau divers describe reading the underwater environment, a continuous real-time assessment of conditions that requires specific knowledge to interpret. Current patterns, visibility, the behavior of fish, the texture of the seafloor, where the sea cucumbers are by season. This is not intuition. It is accumulated observation, transmitted across generations, the same pattern that underlies every traditional ecological knowledge system. The preparation before a dive is also specific and practiced. Controlled breathing, not hyperventilation. Hyperventilation lowers CO2 levels and can cause shallow water blackout, a condition in which the diver loses consciousness on the way back to the surface before the urge to breathe triggers. This danger is well known in the community and avoided by experienced divers through a specific approach to pre-dive breathing that is different from what an uninformed person might attempt. There is also an economic logic to how the diving is organized. Bajau divers do not go until exhaustion in a single session. They pace themselves across a working day, making many shorter dives rather than pushing every dive to the limit. The limit dives, the long ones that researchers have documented, happen in specific circumstances, not as routine. Blast fishing, the use of explosives to stun and collect fish, has damaged large areas of reef in the Coral Triangle, destroying the ecosystems the Bajau depend on. It is practiced by both Bajau and non-Bajau fishing operations, and the Bajau, without the political and economic leverage of larger groups, have limited ability to stop it in waters they have fished for 1,000 years. Many younger Bajau have moved to land-based settlements, drawn by access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities that boat and stilt house life does not provide. Diving as a way of life is declining in some communities. What this means for the genetics is not yet studied in any meaningful way. A trait that evolved under strong selection pressure over centuries does not disappear in one generation. The Bajau will likely retain their enlarged spleens, regardless of whether future generations dive. But the knowledge, the reading of underwater environments, the pre-dive breathing, the pacing of a diving day, that is transmitted through practice, and practice is declining. The Ilardo paper is important not just because of what it found about the Bajau. It is important because of what it demonstrates about human evolution more broadly. We tend to think of evolution as something that happened to us a very long time ago, that modern humans are a finished product. The Bajau are evidence that we are not. Given consistent selection pressure and enough generations, the body responds. It changes. A population that needed to stay underwater longer grew larger spleens. The mechanism is the same one that has operated on every living thing for 4 billion years. It just happened to a group of people who are alive right now. If you made it this far, thank you. The genetics paper is linked in the description. It is open access and worth reading directly. If you want more on how human populations have adapted to extreme environments, subscribe and leave what you want covered next in the comments. I read them all.